My name's Nigel, and welcome to my podcast, Songs Nobody Asked Me For. This is one of those rare podcasts when I'm sort of doing something for the second time because I did one and I didn't really like what I said, or it didn't do something for me really, and I kind of thought I would do it again really because I was kind of caught up in two things really. I recorded this before on the day after the 10th anniversary of David Bowie's passing. And I was really interested in him, and I'm going to talk some more about him. And from it also then came sort of some thoughts about influences, musical influences, and how they can be positive and negative, and the dilemmas of sharing influences really. And I thought that's what I would talk about today, sort of musical influences on writing, playing, what we choose to get into. I remember well, as I would, because it's my podcast, interviewing John, or talking with John, the bass player in my band, and talking about the amazing sort of funk guitar that he plays. And within that, him sort of talking about how odd that was, because he doesn't actually listen particularly to funk music. It's not his genre, it's not what he likes, but actually when he plays the guitar, he kind of that's where his head goes, and he's amazing at producing these kind of funky licks and bass hooks, and they really, and occasionally they're what we base our songs on. It's how I write, and maybe he gives me one of those, and either it goes off in a different direction, or I try to do something that means we have that line, or I'll have written something, and what he brings to that is one of the things that most stands out really. But it's not what he's into really, and I don't know. I was reflecting on this over the 10th anniversary of David Bowie's death, and any of you that are into Bowie, and I have a full-on man crush for David Bowie. I'm kind of in love with David Bowie and his music, and it's just he's a phenomenal guy. Kind of we'll talk some more about that. But I was kind of thinking that I remember how profoundly affected I was for a short period of time, because I don't know him. It's kind of one of those things, isn't it? We all feel, oh no, this person's gone in our lives, and then, of course, it's not the same as losing your father or your relative or your friend, but it still had a big impact. And the idea of the world without David Bowie around was kind of odd, really, and missed him for a while around the place, really, and still do. And then in other ways, he's taken on, although he died older, he's taken on that slightly iconic status that people who die young do. I think he did two things that really benefited him. The way he passed, in terms of being remembered forever, really, and how he did that, and producing a amazing album just which came out a couple of days before he died, and also that I think that long period of time he had not bringing anything out. I think it was about 10 years of not bringing anything out, so that everyone thought he had gone. That he was no longer going to be doing anything, and it was. I think he avoided then doing that thing that a lot of artists do. He did quite a lot of it, which was producing more and more average but okay music over time. Think of other bands that have been around forever, artists, and they keep producing, and I know why would you not? But it may be ever decreasing returns, and some of it's good, but it's never quite as good as that sort of particular period that somebody's in that's phenomenal. So maybe in doing his 10-year break, I think he avoided some of that. He clearly had done some of that. I think the period after, there's a debate in that. But let's say for the minute after Let's Dance, I think through, up until, for me, the next day, really, the album that came out 10 years after he'd not brought anything else out, I think was okay. But it wasn't stuff it's not still stuff I don't know that well. I know some of the singles, I've listened to some of the albums, but they don't do much for me in a way. But he then avoided that, so he was able to sort of come back completely fresh and different 10 years later. Good thing to do. People sort of hit that stride, I think, of their best music and what they're doing at different times in their careers, I guess. And I'm living in hope that that's happening for me now, as the band are getting tighter and tighter and bigger and more adventurous. But you can see that some people do that in their 20s or their 30s or their 40s, and you know, maybe there are. I'm living in hope. I'm living in hope that some people do it in their 60s, really. But why not? Why not? Um, I met Bowie's music, as it were, probably when I was 15, I think. Um, yeah, I think I was about 15. And my elder brother, who's I always credit for giving me a few decent influences over time, bought me Hunky Dory um, for Christmas. And it's kind of one of those albums that I just fell in love with straight away, which isn't always, you know, new artists, you're not sure about things, but every single track I remember just really liking. And that was amazing. And then I really think by the time I was about, I think it was when I was 16, 17. Then I bought my, you know, my first contemporaneous album of his, which would have been Scary Monsters, and then started collecting back catalogue stuff really, and just, you know, being so into all of those albums, and the changes, changes, I guess I should say, that he went through, and the, you know, the diversity of the music, you know, it's just phenomenal really, and his images and the way he looked, and we all know this stuff. You know, I've got nothing new to say about that really. So yeah, Hunky Dory still lives with me as my favourite Bowie album, and I followed him through right through until I think Black Tie White Noise was the last album I bought. Um, so I managed to survive the darkest periods of his career, which I think would have been probably Never Let Me Down, because I was desperate to want it to be good. I think that's what it was, desperate for it to be okay. Um, and really, yeah, I couldn't listen to it now, really. Quite like Tonight, it's okay. But there's always this little debate, as far as I'm concerned, you know, certainly people I know, about whether Scary Monsters or Let's Dance is the last of those, that classic run of albums. And in my view, Let's Dance is, and just simply because it's the last reinvention, the last iteration that sort of kind of feels genuine and authentic. And I think what he did, which was a mistake, was that reinvention was This Is Me, and suddenly became this really sort of affable, approachable kind of, dare I say, sort of kind of normal looking sort of David Bowie, normal for the 80s anyway, sort of blonde hair and powder blue suits and shoulder pads and all of that sort of stuff that we were all hanging around. Well, I wasn't hanging around with blonde hair anyway, but yeah, I think he that was a mistake really. And I also, you know, I was watching that film about Bruce Springsteen the other day, you know, the sort of documentary or docudrama about him making Nebraska. And you know, he just had a really commercial album out, and they wanted more really. And even though he was already in at that period producing some of the tracks that went on to be born in the USA, I think he just decided he was going to do his own thing. He didn't want to become so commercialized, and so didn't do, you know, go from Born to Run straight through to Born in the USA. Um, and I think maybe Bowie should have done the same, because I think what he did was you know, he had pressure to make Let's Dance number two really, because it was so phenomenally successful, and I guess yeah, I think he was striving to do that and continued to strive to do that. And I think maybe he should have just, yeah, gone off in the other direction, or maybe stopped bringing anything out for a year or two and then just done something completely different. But you know, hindsight's a wonderful thing, and you know, we just have this amazing depth of music. Depth of music's astonishing. Yeah, I was kind of thinking of my influences really, and that Bowie has to sit there as a musical influence for me. But like John described, I think that my musical influences are not obvious in my music. I I've talked about Genesis as being a band that I was really inspired by. Um, but also, I've talked about Elvis Costello. Pav and I had a long chat about one in which we talked about Elvis Costello as being a real influence for writing words. And I would add someone like Joe Jackson to that as well, who's kind of in a similar vein. Um, Real influences on me. And later on, I guess, for me, the influence of bands like XTC, The Jam, would have been influential on me. when we were playing live. So I mean, it wasn't later on in a way, but I think when I was in the bands in London, that sort of indie sort of vibe came from, for me particularly, those two bands. So I can directly see a line of approach, whereas nowadays I can't. Nowadays I'm much more into this sort of indie funk sort of thing we're trying to produce, and it's the funk I love. And again, I wasn't a great listener of funk. I love Jamiroquai, and that's around. But someone like Bowie's really interesting because when I was younger, I was thinking of, again, a conversation Pav and I had in our first conversation, the one that's really hard to listen to because the sound is so bad, that for me and him, I think that punk and the arrival of punk liberated us in some way because it allowed you to feel that you could do anything, and that was an inspiration in itself. So it wasn't the music; it was the idea of just go and do it. And the more I think about it, although there's some great music in that, that's one of the main really useful things to come out of the punk rock movement is that idea of anyone can have a go type of thing, you know. But Bowie's more complex than that because I loved Bowie, but the more I focus, I think I still do actually have one of his one of those songbooks I was talking about that I had around the Beatles. Hang on, I'm gonna find it. I'm pretty certain I can see it just here, or maybe not. Maybe I've lost it. No, I don't. I don't know where it's gone actually. That's a bit of a shame, isn't it? So no, can't find that because I don't know where it was. I wonder what I've done with it. I had a Bowie songbook anyway. And what I found from that is the more I worked on those songs, because when I was younger, I did have some of these books. I did try and work out songs. He was both an inspiration and a sort of off-putting influence, because the off-putting part of it is I can't do this. He was so talented in a particular way. It just really, at some level, disabled me. At another level, it inspired me. So it's a complex influence. It's not, things that influence you don't necessarily influence you just in this is what I want to do. There was some of that, I experimented with the way he wrote words. I think I talked in one of my other podcasts about Aquamarine, actually. It's quite a while back, but I've just been listening to it because it's not long gone out, and how I wrote that and what that was about. And I think that way he wrote sometimes of sort of writing lines of songs and then almost like mixing them up and moving them around. I've tried that when I was younger, and that's probably the one example of that kind of went okay. And I think that there's a vagueness in my words, which I often talk about, that I think somehow maybe comes a little bit from Bowie, because some of his songs are not straightforward what they're about or what they're you can find those meanings in them, but they're not obvious at times. And I like that. So I guess Bowie influenced me, but not in a way that was always helpful, because I just couldn't be that out there original. And of course, I'm far more conformist and just average Joe, I guess. I wrote a song 10 years ago on the day after he died, which what made me think of doing the podcast at the time, which was influenced by his death. And I'm not, I really am not a poet. I'm not a great sort of lyricist, but the first verse was hidden deep in the veins of my average man. And I really kind of was thinking about myself as being this very average man, but a person that's somewhere inside me. I think there's another line, how did you know a bluebird swooped around my soul? And today doesn't seem like a normal day was another line. And and then I was just, the chorus was kind of almost like an anthem about him, really, which was sort of just saying, look, shout me down, you're never going to change a thing about me. Worldly ways, burden and unburden the soul. Wonderful lyrics. We've never done it as a band. It's a song that, it's called Never Know. I like it a lot, really like it. I don't know why we've never done it properly as a band. We've used it, sometimes I sing it at the beginning of a set as a way of kind of just bulking out our set. But I've always been, I've always liked that idea that this is another influence. That's why I'm stuttering around this. And that's Talking Heads. I love Talking Heads, and there's a great film. I'm sure many of you will have seen it, but Stop Making Sense, which is kind of probably the best film of a band playing a gig you could ever see, really. And he comes on at the beginning, David Byrne, just with a ghetto blaster, as it would have been then. He says, "Oh, hi, I just want to play you something," and it's got this drum beat on it, and that's all it is, and it's him and his guitar, and he just sings Psycho Killer at the beginning, and then the band come on. I can't remember now, and I think maybe they come on. A couple of them come on. He does another song, and then they all come on. And I really loved that idea of just coming on my own, and then the band coming in and joining towards the end of the song. And we do that a bit, I suppose, but I would love that song to become something because I think it would work as a band song. I must think about that really. But that was the ultimate inspiration from Bowie. Really, of thinking, well, because I don't write about events very much. I write about ideas and I write about themes and politics and things that are going on. But an event is not something I write about that often. So it's unusual, really. Yeah. I don't know. Is this going okay? Is this all right? I often struggle with not getting the feedback. If I'm teaching, because I teach quite a lot to do with my psychotherapy that I do, and if I'm rambling a bit, I'll often stop and say to people, "Is this okay? Is this all right?" And try and get some feedback. But as ever with me, things are always a bit complex, really, and I think that we're influenced in ways, but what are we influenced to? So if I took this in a sort of, this is just me going off at a tangent in my brain, really. We say that people influence us, but what do they influence us to do? So I don't think that if I think of Genesis or Bowie or Costello or Talking Heads or any of the bands that I would say influenced me as a musician, they didn't influence the music that I write. We're getting somewhere here. They influence my desire to write music. They influence my desire to write music, to do that thing. I want to do that. I want to be someone who writes music. I want to be a musician that plays my own stuff. And I think maybe that's the influence. Yeah. And that would be why, I don't try and write Bowie type songs. I don't try and write Elvis Costello type songs. I've never tried to do that. I try to write a variety of songs. I like being in a band that is a slightly on the edge of genres band. I don't like fitting into this, everything we do has to be indie. And my band in London, we were very much an indie band. Where we are now, although we've got this, I call this genre of our own, indie funk, it's because we're trying to, some songs lend themselves much more towards being more funk driven. Then we have the sort of ones that are much more indie driven, and that's very obvious. But there are other places we go. Places where in a fast or a thrashium. There's one song of ours that I always think is a bit of a rock song, really, called Hiding in Time. And then we have, one of the new songs that will be out by now on our new EP that isn't out yet. It's called Everything Is Fine, and that has a kind of a Latin bossa nova type of beat to it. I like that. I like that sense of variation, really, where some people want to sort of stay in a vein of what they do. And the vein of what we do is dictated to by the musicians we have in the band. So we're a particular type of band. If Brad left us, our guitarist, and I thought, well, we'll get a keyboard player in instead, it would change how it sounded. Or if we got a brass section or some backing singers, or everything changes what we do. And I love that. And I can also see why, though I wouldn't want to do it that way, someone like Paul Weller felt eventually constricted by being in the Jam, because you have guitar, bass and drums, and that's all you can use. And so wanting to play with different musicians in different ways, I can see the appeal of that. For me, I'd rather build, so there are 5 of us now. I would love to get a keyboard player in, but like with the guitarist, with Brad, when we got him in, we had to get the right guitarist, somebody that wasn't just going to take over or wasn't going to change our sound so much. You want something to add to your sound, but yeah, it's interesting. I don't know where I went off on that tangent, but it's about the music that I create that is that is mine, that's influenced as a process by those other people. I missed many years ago. Elvis Costello came to Dartington, which is in Devon here, and he did a workshop on songwriting workshop. I missed it, and I would so love to have gone on that. Not to write Elvis Costello songs, but just to learn a bit about his process of writing and what he did, and that would have been amazing. But there you go. Another one of those things lost to me in time. Well, I think that must be 20 minutes, and I try and always keep these around 20 minutes, sometimes less, sometimes more, but it seems to work. Do follow the band, come and find out what sort of weird and wonderful stuff I do. Especially, I guess we must have a EP that's relatively new out at the moment. Hashtag Music the Curve. You can find us. Please subscribe, follow the podcast if you can. Like the episode. These things really help, and they make me feel better about myself. But also, they help on the platforms that I'm trying to promote myself and move this podcast forward on. Thanks for your time, and I will see you again.